Judge Anthony Trenga tried to silence Pam Bondi by threatening her with jail, but what she revealed next left the entire courtroom and the country stunned. The federal courthouse in Alexandria buzzed with anticipation as Judge Trenga entered. Courtroom 14A. At 63, he was known for his rigid control of proceedings, but today something was different. The air practically hummed with tension. Media crews packed the gallery, ready for drama. The case involved explosive allegations of prosecutorial misconduct in a politically charged investigation, and at the center of it all stood Pam Bondi, former Florida Attorney General and now lead defense counsel. Her fierce reputation had earned her both devoted allies and powerful enemies. Judge Trenga's face was locked in an expression of open hostility. He shuffled papers with exaggerated force, his jaw working as he reviewed the morning's arguments. Veteran bailiffs exchanged looks. They could sense it. The judge was itching for a fight. "The court will now hear arguments on the defense motion to dismiss," Trenga declared, his voice edged like a blade. "Miss Bondi, you may proceed. But be warned, this court has little patience for theatrical grandstanding." The warning shot came before Bondi had even spoken. She rose from the defense table, moving with the composed precision of a veteran. Her navy suit was impeccable, her blonde hair pulled back in a professional sweep. At 59, she had weathered political tempests that would have drowned most. "Thank you, Your Honor," she said smoothly, her voice low and calm. "The defense respectfully submits that the charges against our client lack the fundamental legal foundation required under—" "Miss Bondi," Trenga cut in, leaning forward like a predator about to pounce. "Are you seriously going to waste this court's time with procedural technicalities? We all know your reputation for creative legal interpretations." The insult hung in the air like a pall of smoke. Judges occasionally spar with attorneys, but Trenga's tone was dripping with personal venom. Several reporters started scribbling, sensing that they were witnessing the opening salvos of something extraordinary. Bondi met Trenga's glare without so much as a blink. "Your Honor, I believe the court may be conflating zealous advocacy with impropriety," she said evenly. "The motion is based on well-established precedent from this very district." "Don't lecture me about precedent in my courtroom," Trenga snapped, his cheeks flushing red. "I've been practicing law since before you were elected to your first political office. Your history of bending the rules to serve your political masters is well documented." The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Even the prosecutors looked uncomfortable at the judge's unusually harsh tone. Defense attorney Michael Harrison half rose from his seat, but thought better of it, sinking back down. The buzz in the gallery intensified. This was no ordinary courtroom clash. Bondi stayed perfectly still at the podium, her face a mask of calm. Years of political warfare had taught her the value of composure in the face of fire. "Your Honor," she replied softly, "perhaps we could focus on the legal merits of the motion rather than personal characterizations. The defendant's constitutional rights deserve consideration based on law, not politics." The quiet rebuke only seemed to pour gasoline on the fire. Trenga's knuckles whitened as he gripped the bench, a tremor in his hand betraying the force of his barely restrained anger. He leaned back in his chair, eyes locked on Bondi. 30 seconds of silence stretched out, an eternity in the cramped, expectant courtroom. When he finally spoke again, his voice was dripping with disdain. "Miss Bondi, your reputation precedes you," he sneered. "This court has reviewed your recent filings, and I'm appalled by what can only be described as systematic manipulation of these proceedings through procedural gamesmanship and media theatrics." The words cracked like thunder. Attorneys exchanged wide-eyed looks, and the court reporters typed feverishly. Even the prosecutors seemed to flinch at the vehemence of the judge's words. Bondi didn't move, hands resting lightly on the podium. She had faced hostility before, but this was something different. This was personal. "Your Honor," she said quietly, I'm not sure what aspects of our filings concern you. If you could identify... Don't play games with me, Trenga growled, cutting her off. Your entire approach reeks of the same political manipulation that characterized your tenure in Florida. Filing frivolous motions, making inflammatory press statements. This isn't a political rally, Ms. Bondi. This is a federal courtroom, and I will not tolerate any attorney turning it into a circus for their own self-aggrandizement. He paused, fingers drumming a staccato rhythm on the bench that echoed through the hushed courtroom. Then he leaned in, voice dropping to a menacing whisper that carried to every corner of the gallery. I want to be absolutely clear. If you continue on this path, you will be held in contempt of court. This courtroom is not your personal stage, and I will not allow the administration of justice to be mocked under my watch. The tension in the room was electric. Bailiffs shifted subtly, ready for anything. Reporters' pens flew, capturing every word of this showdown. And Pam Bondi, calm and unflinching, stood ready to reveal what would leave not just this courtroom, but the entire country, stunned. The courtroom held its collective breath as Trenga's accusations echoed through the panelled chamber, alleging that statements had been crafted to prejudice potential jurors and undermine the integrity of these proceedings. He leveled the kind of charges that could lead to fines and jail time for contempt, a serious matter in federal court. But his words seemed to lack any grounding in Bondi's actual conduct, transforming what should have been an impartial rebuke into something deeply personal and unsettling. Your Honor, Bondi said, her voice calm and steady, I would respectfully request that the court identify specific instances of alleged misconduct. The defense has made every effort to comply fully with all applicable rules and procedures. Her composed tone only seemed to enrage Trenga further. He slammed his palm against the bench so hard that his water glass jumped, causing several in the gallery to flinch. Contempt of court, Miss Bondi. That's what I'm talking about, he thundered. Your continued attempts to manipulate these proceedings, coupled with your disrespectful tone and obvious political agenda, are a direct threat to the administration of justice in this courtroom. The gallery erupted in hushed whispers. Even reporters, hardened veterans of countless trials, recognized the sheer drama unfolding before them. Trenga's hostility had veered so far from judicial impartiality that it now bordered on open bias. I am hereby considering holding you in contempt of court, Trenga declared, his voice echoing off the polished wood. The penalty can include immediate incarceration until you demonstrate proper respect for this court and abandon your obvious attempts to corrupt these proceedings. The threat hung in the air like a blade. Immediate jail time for an attorney who had done nothing more than argue a routine motion. Even the prosecution team looked stunned by the judge's furious outburst. Bondi's shoulders straightened, her spine stiffening with what onlookers recognized as an unyielding core of steel beneath her velvet courtesy. She had faced down politicians, prosecutors, and hostile media for decades. A rogue judge's tantrum wouldn't intimidate her now. The room practically vibrated with tension, yet Bondi stood at the podium as if she'd anticipated this exact confrontation from the start. Your Honor, she began, her voice clear and unwavering. Before the court considers any contempt proceedings, I believe it would be prudent to examine the legal foundation for such action. Trenga's eyes narrowed to slits. Are you seriously going to lecture me about contempt law in my own courtroom? Not at all, Your Honor, Bondi replied evenly. I am simply exercising my constitutional right to due process, which requires that any contempt finding be based on specific misconduct rather than generalized disapproval. Her tone was respectful, yet firm, an expert navigating a hostile environment with the poise of a veteran. She reached for her leather portfolio, moving with deliberate precision. The Supreme Court established in Bloom versus Illinois that contempt proceedings must adhere to strict procedural safeguards, particularly when incarceration is at stake. Criminal contempt is a crime in the ordinary sense, requiring proof beyond a reasonable doubt. A few attorneys leaned forward, recognizing the subtle shift. Bondi was no longer just defending herself. She was constructing a framework that would expose the judge's overreach. Furthermore, the Fourth Circuit in United States versus Martin made clear that judges must identify specific acts constituting contempt and provide the accused with an opportunity to respond. Trenga's jaw clenched tight. "Miss Bondi, your grandstanding won't save you from the consequences of your misconduct." "Respectfully, Your Honor, what specific misconduct?" Bondi's question cut through the tense air like a scalpel. Her calm, unwavering demand for clarity left the courtroom holding its breath. "The court has made several broad accusations," she continued, "but it has yet to identify any particular act or statement that violates court rules." The silence that followed was deafening. Reporters scribbled frantically, aware they were witnessing a rare and riveting moment, an attorney dismantling a judge's threats with cold, precise logic. Bondi paused, then continued, her words crisp and deliberate. "In fact, the defense has scrupulously complied with all applicable rules. Our motions were filed on time, included proper citations, and followed standard formatting. Our media statements referenced only general legal principles, never case-specific facts." She let the words settle before delivering her final point, measured and unyielding. "It appears, Your Honor, that these threats of contempt are not rooted in any particular misconduct. Rather, they seem driven by a general disapproval of the defense team's reputation and political background. Such bias cannot form the legal basis for contempt in a federal courtroom." Trenga's face flushed purple with frustration, but Bondi pressed on. Her dismantling of his overreach was methodical, almost surgical. "I would further note that the court's characterizations rely on assumptions, not evidence. The court has suggested our filings amount to gamesmanship and theatrics, yet has failed to identify any filing or statement that crosses legal boundaries." The prosecution team sat frozen, witnessing what many would later call a masterclass in courtroom advocacy. Bondi's final words were both a defense and a challenge. "Your Honor," she said, her voice unwavering, "I understand that this case involves sensitive political issues and strong emotions, but due process and judicial neutrality cannot be abandoned simply because the case draws media attention." She turned slightly, her eyes meeting those of the reporters, documenting every word, an unspoken acknowledgement that this confrontation would be remembered for a long time to come. In one of the most gripping courtroom confrontations in recent memory, the defense delivered its opening salvo with calm, professional precision. "Your Honor," Bondi began, her voice steady and unwavering, "the defense respectfully submits that any contempt proceedings based on the court's stated concerns would violate fundamental due process principles. We would appeal any such order immediately, confident that reviewing courts would find the proceedings improper." The words hung in the air, their impact delayed but undeniable. It wasn't merely a defense, it was a warning. Bondi was putting Judge Trenga on notice. His behavior was under scrutiny, and any abuses of power would not stand unchallenged. Yet beneath that poised defiance, a subtle shift had occurred. Bondi's defensive posture was gone, replaced by something that looked almost like anticipation. "Your Honor," she said quietly, her tone deceptively calm. "Perhaps this would be an appropriate time to address additional matters that have come to the defense's attention regarding the propriety of these proceedings." For the first time all morning, Trenga's eyes widened in alarm. "What additional matters?" he demanded. Bondi's faint smile was barely perceptible, a flicker of something that hinted at far more than she was letting on. "Matters," she said, "that go to the very heart of judicial ethics and the integrity of these proceedings. As she spoke, Bondi reached into her briefcase with measured deliberation, drawing out a thick manila folder. Her movements were precise, almost ceremonial, the actions of someone who knew the full weight of what she was about to reveal. "During our preparation," Bondi began, her voice taking on a new authority, "the defense team conducted routine research into recent rulings from this court. What we discovered raises serious questions about judicial impartiality." A hush fell over the room. Even the court reporters leaned forward, sensing the drama about to unfold. In United States versus Patterson, Bondi continued, "This court denied a motion to suppress evidence that every other judge in this district had granted. And in United States versus Vero Rodriguez, this court imposed a sentence that exceeded federal guidelines by 300%, despite the defendant's cooperation and clean record. The Fourth Circuit reversed that sentence as an abuse of discretion." Trenga's face had turned from red to a sickly grey. "Miss Bondi, I will not sit here and—" But Bondi pressed on, her voice cutting cleanly through his attempted interruption. "And in United States versus Chen, Your Honor denied a routine continuance request, resulting in inadequate preparation time. That conviction was also reversed." The gallery buzzed with a low murmur as reporters scribbled furiously. Bondi was not just exposing judicial missteps, she was suggesting something far more sinister. "These cases share two troubling characteristics," she said. "First, they involve defendants with perceived political connections. Second, they suggest a pattern of judicial overreach, perhaps even personal animus, rather than impartial application of the law." Judge Trenga half rose from his seat, his composure fracturing. "This is outrageous. I will not—" "Most concerning," Bondi interjected, her tone now commanding the entire room, "are the financial conflicts of interest that appear to have influenced these rulings." The word struck like a hammer blow. Financial conflicts were among the most damning allegations that could be leveled at a federal judge. Allegations that carried the weight of automatic investigation and potential criminal charges. Bondi extracted a second folder, marked conspicuously with red tabs. "Public records indicate, Your Honor, that you have significant financial investments in companies that have directly benefited from prosecutions conducted in this very courtroom." A gasp rippled through the gallery. The gravity of the moment was undeniable. Bondi pressed on, her voice unwavering. Such conflicts would not only invalidate affected cases, they could result in criminal charges for judicial misconduct. She didn't stop there. "Furthermore, bank records show unusual financial activity patterns coinciding with several of your high-profile rulings," she said, her words landing like precision-guided strikes. Trenga was visibly shaking now, his judicial mask shattered. "You have no right to investigate. Every citizen has the right to expect judicial impartiality, Your Honor," Bondi retorted, her voice low but resolute. "When that impartiality is compromised by financial conflicts or personal bias, the entire justice system suffers." The courtroom crackled with electric anticipation. Reporters exchanged glances, realizing they were witnessing the potential exposure of deep-seated judicial corruption. Defense attorney Michael Harrison approached the bench with another stack of documents. "Your Honor, we have prepared a formal recusal motion based on these conflicts, as well as a request for a comprehensive review of all cases heard by this court in the past 2 years." The implications were staggering. If Bondi's allegations held up, dozens of convictions could be overturned, prosecutions dismissed, and Judge Trenga's career and reputation obliterated. Trenga slumped back in his chair, the fight drained from his eyes. The man who moments earlier had threatened Bondi with jail now sat defeated, as if watching the pillars of his world crumble. Bondi's slight smile returned, a quiet signal that the most damning revelations were yet to come. She stepped forward, holding up a sealed envelope with deliberate calm. "Your Honor," she said softly, "what I'm about to present came to our attention through proper legal channels during this case's preparation." Trenga's voice came out hoarse, almost broken. "Miss Bondi, I think we should take a recess." Bondi's response was as surgical as it was final. "I'm afraid that won't be possible, Your Honor. The nature of this information requires immediate disclosure to ensure the integrity of these proceedings." She raised the envelope high for all to see. "This contains a sworn affidavit from a whistleblower within the federal judiciary," she said. "A statement detailing conduct that goes far beyond what we have discussed so far." The room was silent, every breath held in suspense, as Bondi prepared to reveal the final blow that could bring an entire courtroom empire crashing down. Financial conflicts they had been discussing were now impossible to ignore. The prosecution team shifted uncomfortably, and Sarah Chen, once proud of her near-perfect conviction rate, began to realize that much of her success might have been built on judicial misconduct. The affidavit spelled it out, explicit instances where His Honor had allegedly coordinated with the prosecution outside proper channels, sharing advanced knowledge of defense strategies and effectively deciding outcomes before evidence was even presented. Gasps echoed through the gallery. Allegations like this went beyond misconduct. They spoke of active conspiracy to deny constitutional rights and fair trials. Judge Trenga tried to reclaim control. "Ms. Bondi, I am ordering you to cease this presentation immediately. You are in contempt." But Bondi's voice sliced through his shaky command. "Your Honor, I believe you'll find that your authority to hold anyone in contempt has been significantly undermined by the evidence we're presenting." She broke the envelope seal with deliberate ceremony, ensuring every camera in the cast room caught the moment. The whistleblower affidavit contains recorded conversations, email exchanges, and financial records, all painting a portrait of systematic corruption spanning multiple cases. Sarah Chen stood abruptly. "Your Honor, the prosecution requests an immediate recess to review." "Denied," Trenga snapped, though his voice trembled with uncertainty. He was stuck between maintaining his control and confronting the undeniable truth that his position was crumbling. Bondi raised several pages for the court cameras to see, their official seals and signatures shining under the harsh courtroom lights. "The affidavit specifically references conversations where Your Honor allegedly stated that certain defendants deserved conviction regardless of evidence, and that constitutional protections were obstacles to be overcome rather than rights to be defended." Her words hung heavy in the air, a death knell for Trenga's career. Federal judges took oaths to uphold the Constitution. Evidence of deliberate violations would trigger immediate investigations by multiple agencies. Bondi pressed on, her voice unyielding. "Furthermore, financial records suggest a pattern of payments from interested parties that coincided suspiciously with favorable rulings in their cases." Trenga's face turned ashen. He clutched the arms of his chair like a man trying to anchor himself against the collapse of his entire world. "This is all fabricated," he whispered, but even he knew his denial had no weight. Bondi's voice remained calm. "The affidavit has been submitted to the Department of Justice, the FBI and the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals," she said. "Copies have also been provided to the House and Senate Judiciary Committees and the relevant ethics oversight bodies." Trenga wasn't just facing the prospect of judicial discipline. He was now staring down the barrel of federal criminal charges for corruption, conspiracy, and civil rights violations. Then, movement at the back of the courtroom caught Bondi's attention. Several men in dark suits had entered quietly. Their presence confirmed that the morning's revelations had already attracted official attention. The sight of federal agents at the back of Courtroom 14A sent shockwaves through the gallery. Trenga, already reeling from Bondi's disclosures, now faced every corrupt official's nightmare: the arrival of law enforcement with badges and warrants. The lead agent, a tall woman with graying hair and the confident bearing of someone who had taken down powerful figures before, approached the bailiff with quiet authority. She flashed her credentials: Special Agent Patricia Martinez, FBI Public Corruption Unit. "Please inform the court that we have urgent business that cannot wait," Martinez said, her voice clear and commanding. Trenga's hands shook visibly as he watched the exchange. The once imposing jurist who had threatened Bondi with jail time now looked like a cornered animal, searching for non-existent escape routes. "Your Honor," the bailiff announced in a steady voice, "Special Agent Martinez from the Federal Bureau of Investigation requests an immediate audience with the court." Martinez didn't wait for permission. She strode down the center aisle, 3 other agents flanking her. The courtroom, once the scene of legal maneuvering, had become the site of a real-time criminal reckoning. Court reporters typed furiously, and photographers captured every unprecedented moment. Reaching the bar, Martinez spoke. "Your Honor, I am Special Agent Patricia Martinez with the FBI's Public Corruption Unit. We are here as part of an ongoing federal investigation into allegations of judicial misconduct, corruption, and civil rights violations." Her words struck like hammer blows. Trenga tried to assert himself, but his voice cracked. "Agent Martinez, this court is in session. Any federal business must be scheduled through the proper channels." Martinez's response was cold, professional, like someone who had done this before. "I'm afraid the nature of our investigation requires immediate action, Your Honor. We have credible evidence of criminal activity that cannot wait for scheduling convenience." She gestured subtly to her fellow agents, who had already taken positions around the room. "We have been monitoring this proceeding as part of our investigation, and the evidence presented by the defense this morning corroborates information from our own independent sources." Bondi stepped back from the podium, understanding her role in the morning's drama was complete. She had not only defended herself from Trenga's improper threats, but had exposed a corruption scandal that stretched far beyond a single courtroom. Martinez continued, her tone unwavering. "We have executed search warrants for Your Honors, chambers, personal residences, and financial records. Our investigation has uncovered evidence of bribery, conspiracy to deny civil rights, and obstruction of justice across multiple cases over the past 2 years." The courtroom erupted in barely contained chaos. Reporters sprinted to file breaking news stories, and legal observers knew they were witnessing the spectacular, real-time downfall of a federal judge. The prosecution team sat frozen in stunned silence, realizing that every conviction they had secured before Trenga would now come under scrutiny, tainted by the corruption he had so carefully concealed. Now Suspect Martinez approached the bench directly, her badge displayed prominently. "Your Honor, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Reading Miranda rights to a sitting federal judge was an act almost without precedent in modern American jurisprudence. The symbolism was immense. The man who had spent his career interpreting the law was now subject to it in the most dramatic and public way possible. The morning that had begun with Judge Trenga threatening to jail Pam Bondi was ending with federal agents preparing to arrest the judge himself. Special Agent Martinez reached into her jacket and produced a folded document bearing the distinctive seal of the U.S. District Court. The warrant had been signed by Chief Judge Rebecca Morrison, Trenga's own colleague, adding another layer of humiliation to his spectacular fall. Anthony Trenga, Martinez announced formally, her voice carrying the weight of federal authority. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to violate civil rights under color of law, bribery of a federal official, and obstruction of justice. Please stand and place your hands behind your back." The words echoed through the packed courtroom like a death knell for judicial corruption. Cameras clicked furiously, capturing every moment as a sitting federal judge was treated like any other criminal defendant. The irony was not lost on anyone present. The man who had dispensed justice for years was now experiencing it in the most public way possible. Trenga remained frozen in his chair, apparently unable to process the reality of the situation. His black judicial robes, once symbols of authority and respect, now seemed like elaborate costumes on a man revealed as fundamentally corrupt. "This is impossible," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the hushed murmurs. "I am a federal judge. You can't arrest me in my own courtroom." "Sir," Martinez replied with professional calm that only deepened the gravity of the moment, "judicial immunity does not extend to criminal acts. Please comply with our instructions, or we will be forced to use physical restraints." The threat of handcuffs finally broke through Trenga's denial. He rose slowly from his chair, his movements those of a man decades older than his actual age. The black robes that once intimidated attorneys and defendants now hung loosely on his diminished frame. "This is all a mistake," he pleaded as Martinez approached, handcuffs gleaming under the courtroom's fluorescent lights. "I can explain everything. The evidence is taken out of context. I've served this court honorably for 15 years. You'll have an opportunity to explain during your arraignment, sir," Martinez replied evenly. "Right now, you need to comply with arrest procedures." The handcuffs clicked shut with a sound that seemed to echo through the silent courtroom. The man who had threatened to jail Pam Bondi less than 2 hours earlier was now the one in custody, his wrists bound behind his back like any common criminal. "Will you walk voluntarily, or do we need to assist you?" Martinez asked, her tone remaining neutral despite the moment's enormity. Trenga's last shred of dignity crumbled. "Please," he whispered. "Can't we do this without the cameras? I have a family, a reputation to consider." "Your reputation was your own responsibility, Your Honor," Martinez said, her voice steady. "You chose to abuse the trust placed in you by the American people. Now you face the consequences." As the agents began escorting Trenga toward the courtroom's rear exit, he stumbled slightly, his legs unsteady beneath him. The physical manifestation of his collapse underscored the completeness of his fall from grace. Deputy Bates cleared a path through the packed gallery as reporters shouted questions and cameras flashed, capturing the chaotic aftermath. The man who had once commanded absolute silence in his courtroom was now the subject of a media storm he could no longer control. "Judge Trenga, do you have any comment on the charges?" one reporter called out. "Will you resign from the bench?" another shouted. But Trenga could only shuffle forward in his handcuffs, the weight of his crimes and the shame of their exposure pressing down on him like an anchor he would carry for the rest of his life. Chapter 8. The Aftermath and Reaction. Within minutes of Judge Trenga's arrest, news of the unprecedented drama exploded across every major media platform. Cable news channels interrupted regular programming to broadcast the shocking footage of a federal judge being led away in handcuffs from his own courtroom. "This is a developing story out of Alexandria, Virginia," CNN's breaking news anchor announced, where former Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi has just exposed what appears to be a massive corruption scandal involving a sitting federal judge. Outside, the courthouse steps became a media circus. Reporters from every major network jockeyed for position, their microphones poised like spears. Legal analysts who rushed to the scene struggled to find historical precedents for what they had just witnessed in 30 years of covering federal courts. said veteran correspondent Sarah Mitchell. "I have never seen anything approaching this level of judicial misconduct exposed in real time. The evidence presented by Ms. Bondi appears to document systematic corruption that could invalidate dozens of cases." Inside the now empty courtroom, the echoes of the day's events seemed to linger in the air. A place once devoted to the solemn business of justice had become the stage for its most dramatic reckoning. Special Agent Martinez approached the bench directly, her badge held high and her voice firm. "Your Honor, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Reading Miranda rights to a sitting federal judge was unheard of in modern American jurisprudence. The symbolism was overwhelming. A man who had spent his career interpreting the law was now subject to it in the most dramatic way possible. The morning that began with Judge Trenga threatening to jail Pam Bondi was ending with federal agents preparing to arrest the judge himself. Martinez reached into her jacket and produced a folded document stamped with the distinctive seal of the U.S. District Court. The warrant had been signed by Chief Judge Rebecca Morrison, Trenga's own colleague, adding a bitter layer of humiliation to his spectacular downfall. "Anthony Trenga," Martinez announced formally, her voice carrying the full weight of federal authority. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to violate civil rights under color of law, bribery of a federal official, and obstruction of justice. Please stand and place your hands behind your back." The words echoed through the packed courtroom like a death knell for judicial corruption. Photographers captured every moment as a sitting federal judge was treated like any other criminal. Defendant. The irony was unmistakable. The man who had dispensed justice was now at its mercy in the most public way possible. Trenga remained frozen in his chair, unable to fully process the reality of his situation. His judicial robes, once symbols of power and respect, now looked like theatrical costumes draped over a man revealed as fundamentally corrupt. "This is impossible," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the hushed murmurs of the courtroom. "I am a federal judge. You can't arrest me in my own courtroom." "Your judicial immunity does not extend to criminal acts, sir," Martinez replied, her professional patience making the moment even more devastating. "Please comply with our instructions, or we will be forced to use physical restraints." The threat of handcuffs finally pierced Trenga's fog of denial. He rose slowly from his chair, moving like a man decades older than his actual age. The black robes that once intimidated attorneys and defendants now hung loosely on his suddenly diminished frame. "This is all a mistake," he pleaded as Martinez approached, handcuffs glinting under the harsh courtroom lights. "I can explain everything. The evidence is taken out of context. I've served this court honorably for 15 years. "You'll have the opportunity to explain during your arraignment, sir," Martinez said calmly. "Right now you need to comply with arrest procedures." The handcuffs clicked shut with a sound that seemed to echo through the silent courtroom. The man who had threatened to jail Pam Bondi just 2 hours earlier was now the one in custody, his wrists bound behind his back like any common criminal. "Will you walk voluntarily, or do we need to assist you?" Martinez asked, her tone neutral. Despite the unprecedented nature of the arrest, Trenga's last vestige of dignity crumbled. Please," he whispered, almost begging, "can't we do this without the cameras? I have a family, a reputation to consider." "Your reputation was your own responsibility, Your Honor," Martinez replied. "You chose to abuse the trust placed in you by the American people. Now you face the consequences of those choices." As the agents began escorting Trenga toward the rear exit of the courtroom, he stumbled slightly, his legs unsteady beneath him. The physical manifestation of his collapse underscored the completeness of his fall from grace. Bates cleared a path through the packed gallery as reporters shouted questions and cameras flashed in a frenzy. The man who had once commanded absolute Silence in his courtroom was now the subject of a chaotic media circus he could no longer control. "Judge Trenga, do you have any comment on the charges?" One reporter yelled. "Will you resign from the bench?" Another shouted, but Trenga could only shuffle forward in his handcuffs, the weight of his crimes and their consequences settling on his shoulders like a crushing burden he would carry for the rest of his life. Chapter 8. The aftermath and reaction. Within minutes of Judge Trenga's arrest, news of the unprecedented courtroom drama exploded across every major media platform. Cable news channels cut into regular programming to broadcast the stunning footage of a federal judge being led away in handcuffs from his own courtroom. This is a developing story out of Alexandria, Virginia, CNN's breaking news anchor announced breathlessly, where former Florida Attorney General Pam Bondi has just exposed what appears to be a massive corruption scandal involving a sitting federal judge. Outside the courthouse, the steps became a media frenzy as reporters from every network jockeyed for position. Legal analysts who had rushed to the scene struggled to find historical precedents for what they had just witnessed. "In 30 years of covering federal courts," said veteran legal correspondent Sarah Mitchell, "I have never seen anything like this level of judicial misconduct exposed in real time. The evidence presented by Ms. Bondi appears to document systematic corruption that could invalidate dozens of cases." Inside the now empty courtroom, the shockwaves of the arrest were only beginning to ripple outward.